Europe has developed a cocaine problem. The use of this drug is decreasing in the United States, and its value there is dropping. Producers in South America are now shifting their trade routes, and they're shipping primarily to Europe. The European market more than doubled in value since 2017, and this led to a spree of violence along the supply route, particularly in Northern Europe. This is where the Moroccan Mafia controls Europe's two biggest ports, the port of Rotterdam and Antwerp, and particularly the latter has been transformed into Europe's main artery for smuggling cocaine. The region is waking up to the reality of organized crime. Last year in the Netherlands, there were on average 3 explosions every single day. These are mostly small improvised explosives and are used to intimidate rivals. But even politicians have been targeted. In Antwerp, a city of just over 500,000 people, there was a drug-related shooting or explosion on average once every 5 days. But what makes this particularly worrisome is that these mob bosses are now reinvesting their enormous profits into the formal economy. They're corrupting local governments, logistics workers, the courts, and in some cases even the police. While Belgium and the Netherlands are still far from being a narco-state like Mexico or Colombia, it seems increasingly probable that they could develop a similar problem as Italy had with the mafia, or like Bulgaria and Albania have with organized crime. Why did criminals prefer the port of Antwerp as the main artery for smuggling cocaine? How serious is the spread of violence in the Netherlands and in Belgium? And what can be done to prevent these criminals from corrupting society? This is the crime capital of Europe. With Hindsight.
I've been wanting to make a video on this topic for a while already, and today it was made possible by our sponsor, Odoo. Odoo is an all-in-one management software. They provide a range of applications to simplify the day-to-day management of your business. The first application is for free, and if you want to use 2 or more applications, you can change to the paid plan. I want to try out the website application. Odoo guides you through a few simple steps to select your goals, color palette, and to add the pages that you want. They have several themes that you can choose from as a starting point, and that's when the fun starts. So one of the great benefits of Odoo is that they offer you a free personalized domain name for 1 year for free. Their site builder is very intuitive and no technical skills are required. You simply drag and drop blocks and customize them in the sidebar if necessary. And even on the free plan, you get unlimited hosting and support. So if you think that this could be for you, go to the pinned comment or the description and click on my link and claim your first application for free. And now, back to the video.
The ports of Rotterdam and Antwerp have existed for hundreds of years. Antwerp was restored by Napoleon, and he stationed his military fleet on its docks to prepare for a conquest of England. The port remarkably survived World War II and subsequently underwent a rapid period of development and expansion. Today, it stretches all the way to the Dutch border and covers an area of 130 square kilometers, larger than the city of Paris, and even larger than the port of Rotterdam. Rotterdam expanded in phases from the 1920s onwards and transformed into the global center of oil in the 1960s and 70s. Even today, it is the beating heart of the European petrochemical industry. It's connected with pipelines to the Ruhr Valley and the port of Antwerp, and together they are responsible for 40% of total petrochemical production in the EU. The Dutch are now working on reclaiming more land on the port's far end. These ports, with 14 and 13 million containers annually, are the busiest in Europe, followed by Hamburg with 8 million, and France's second largest port of Le Havre is far behind with only 3 million containers per year. They are connected to much of continental Europe through a network of smooth rivers. 5 out of the 6 most productive regions of mainland Europe is directly connected to these ports by a superhighway of rivers. This connection is what Le Havre is missing, and the port of Hamburg is situated 100 kilometers inland. Ships need to travel up the river Elbe, And this river needs to be continuously dredged to support the largest ships. The ports of Antwerp and Rotterdam have geographical advantages. They have excellent connections and they have invested in high-tech infrastructure. This simply made them the most cost-effective solution for many shipping companies, and this facilitated their rise as Europe's busiest ports. And these same advantages is what attracted smugglers of illicit goods. Cocaine is mostly produced in Latin America, and the United States was historically their biggest market. But this began to shift around 2017. That year, the wholesale price of a kilogram of cocaine in the US was $28,000. The average price in Europe, however, was $41,000, with some countries like Finland selling at nearly double that price. There was a higher risk of seizure in the United States, and they had put strict extradition policies in place. All of this contributed to Europe becoming the primary target market for international drug traffickers, and they needed partners. The main producers are in Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia, and they transport the drugs by road or river to various seaports across Latin America. From here, it is sometimes shipped to intermediary countries in the Caribbean and West Africa, from where it's put on ships to head for Europe. Some of this is smuggled by air using mules, but about 70% reaches Europe's shores on a container ship. With more cocaine being shipped to Europe, the use of this drug also increased. Of the 10 cities with the highest cocaine use, Antwerp ranks number 1, followed by Tarragona in Spain and Amsterdam. The amount of cocaine that was shipped to Europe reached a record high in 2021, and so did the seizures. On February 11th, 2021, a container ship was unloading in the port of Rotterdam, and Dutch customs became suspicious of some containers that were heading to Hamburg. They alerted the German authorities, and when the ship reached their port, they discovered 17 tons of cocaine, the largest seizure in European history. Dutch authorities linked this shipment to companies in Rotterdam and Bleskensgraaf, and found out that they had another shipment on the way from Panama. This ship reached the port of Antwerp a week later, and Belgium customs found an additional 7.2 tons of cocaine, and this was only the tip of the iceberg. In 2015, this combined sum would equal the total amount seized in that entire year. But the seizures increased dramatically over the years and saw an 8-time increase by 2023. And behind this trade, a group of hardened criminals was becoming incredibly wealthy. The Dutch press called them the Mocro Mafia, a group of criminal organizations of primarily Moroccan descent who specialize in trafficking cocaine and synthetic drugs through Spain, the Netherlands, and Belgium, and their boss was Ridouan Taghi. He formed part of a so-called super cartel, which had ties with crime syndicates across Europe, including the Italian Mafia and criminal organizations in the Western Balkans, who were the main supplier of weapons. They would often load small buses with guns, ammo, and explosives, which were often remnants from the war in Yugoslavia. These were driven to Northern and Western Europe to fight a turf war on the streets. At one point, Taghi directly controlled about a third of the European market. For his organization, the ports of Antwerp and Rotterdam were seen as one port. All that mattered was which contacts he had on the inside, and where is the risk of seizure the lowest. There has always existed a criminal underworld in the Netherlands and in Belgium, but the fight to control this highly lucrative market became so heated that it spilled onto the streets.
Spreek met de politie. Ja, er is een bom afgegaan.
Ik hoor in een vreselijk knal, ik ben zo bang.
Last year, there were over 1,000 incidents in the Netherlands with explosions that are linked to organized crime. About 2/3 were targeting houses, but amongst them were also an increasing number of businesses. In Rotterdam, in all these places, there have been explosions in 2023, and several sites were targeted more than once. In the first 3 months of 2024, all of these sites have been targeted as well. In Antwerp, we're seeing a similar development. On July 1st, a house in Borgerhout was targeted by a drive-by shooting. 2 days later, another house was targeted just a few blocks away. 2 days later, the first address was targeted again, as well as another house near the airport. 2 days later, there was an explosion at a car wash that was linked to the family of a well-known Belgian kickboxer, Ben Sadiq, who was suspected to have family members that were involved in a drug-related conflict. The next day, a snack bar was targeted in a drive-by shooting, and a few days later, it was set on fire. 2 days later, another house was targeted by a shooting. The next day, a Dutch criminal was assassinated in plain daylight. 2 days later, there was an explosion in another part of town. The following day, another fire was set at that same snack bar. And these were just the first 2 weeks of July. I could go on because this was not an exceptional volume of incidents. In 2023, these were all the drug-related shootings in Antwerp, and these were all the explosions. Let me remind you that Antwerp is a city with only 500,000 residents. This kind of violent spree deeply affects the feeling of security amongst residents. But the real fear is that it spirals out of control, like in the Netherlands. In 2018, a man drove out to the offices of a well-known magazine in Amsterdam, and he shot at the building with a rocket launcher, leaving the facade heavily damaged. That same week, another man drove into the building of one of the country's largest newspapers, and he set the car on fire before fleeing the scene. These newspapers frequently wrote about crime, and these attacks were interpreted as a message from criminal organizations that they could do whatever they wanted. The next year, Ridouan Taghi was arrested in Dubai. Dubai is a popular hideout for European mob bosses because their extradition policies are lax, and it is often possible to leave prison on bail. This arrest started one of the country's most complex criminal cases, and it coincided with a spree of high-profile killings. There were several witnesses, lawyers, and even the country's most famous journalist fell victim to this violence. Around the same time, the Dutch police discovered a torture chamber. It had been completely soundproofed, and it was stocked with tools. There was even a moment when the Dutch Prime Minister had to be placed under tight security over fears that a cocaine gang might try to target him. It is not unthinkable that this trend of high-profile attacks could spread to Belgium. In 2022, several Dutch men were arrested because they were planning to kidnap the Belgian Minister of Justice. Luckily, this was prevented, but European intelligence agencies warn that this is likely to become worse. There are strong signs that the quantity of cocaine that's produced in South America is increasing, and this will likely flood the markets of Europe in the next couple of years. The criminal organizations that control these supply routes in Europe are making a lot of money, and this gives them power. They are trying to corrupt people that are working in the ports by offering them unimaginable sums of money, sometimes simply for looking the other way. There are known cases of members of the local and national government that have been corrupted, and the fear is that these gangs manage to infiltrate the Dutch and Belgian society in a similar way as what happened with the Mafia in Italy or with organized crime groups in Albania and Bulgaria. The port of Rotterdam has been somewhat successful at limiting its importance in the cocaine trade. They increased the fines for trespassing. They are scanning a higher number of containers, and they're investing in better technology. This has been somewhat effective, but it seemed to have transferred the problem to the port of Antwerp.
So the obvious solution to organized crime is for consumers to stop consuming. And I think a lot of our efforts should be directing at achieving this goal. But why is cocaine not simply legal? To me, it seems completely arbitrary that certain drugs like alcohol and tobacco are considered licit, while they also cause a lot of public health issues, while other drugs like cocaine are illicit. There are a couple of places in the world, like in Oregon, where voters recently decided to decriminalize certain hard drugs, including cocaine. And this will be an interesting case study to follow. But I think here in Europe, we should be having this debate more frequently.